All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study. A plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study. Excuse me, through the entire Bible. We are in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3. One of the distinct differences in Mark's presentation of Jesus, he shows more emotion than all of the other. We're going to see that in a moment. He shows a lot more emotions, okay? As well as the fast pace of Mark. But you're going to see the emotion come out of Jesus, how, in some cases, how he, reacts to the Pharisees. So let's get right into it. Mark chapter 3. Verse 1 says, "Now he entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a paralyzed hand. In order to accuse him, they were watching him closely to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath." Okay, so this is right away just amazing, the callousness of the Pharisees. Now, they represent most Christianity today. They represent religion, and I'm going to say even the religion of Christianity. And the religious always are more concerned with their commands, their precepts, their traditions, way over the good of the people, the welfare of the people. In other words, in their minds, they think that God is more interested, in this case, keeping the Sabbath, keeping a tradition. They think God is more concerned with that. When I get into like a debate on water baptism, that people think that God is more concerned with people about getting baptized in water than anything else. If I ask them, well, what if people don't have a chance to have access to water? Oh, no. There's going to be water someplace. Why? Because in their minds, God is more concerned with that than he is with anything else. That's a religious mind. And you will find that religion all over, that they're more concerned, or they think God is more concerned with doing their good deeds, doing their precepts, whatever. Now, of course, the Pharisees they were a different brood, because the callousness, the evilness in their heart that they brought in the name of God. And notice, they did not care about the man. Here's a man who has a withered hand, right? His hand falling with a withered something. And they didn't care about that man. They cared more about, well, let's just see if Jesus is going to break the Sabbath. And get this, notice this. They didn't even care about the Sabbath. Notice, they didn't care about the holiness of God, the integrity of God. In other words, they didn't really care that, man, are we maintaining God's justice, God's holiness? Are we maintaining that? Are we glorifying God? Because to keep this, to obey the Sabbath would have been to glorify God. Anytime you keep God's commandments, you are glorifying him. They didn't even care about that. They were hoping that he would violate the Sabbath so that they could find a way to get him. So that kind of shows you, and when we interact with people, we don't see that inside. So we don't always get a chance to see that. But so let's I just kind of keep that in mind. It's like, wow, right? Now, verse 3 says, he told the man with the paralyzed hand, stand before us. Then he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do what is good or to do what is evil, to save life or to kill, but they were silent. So what was Jesus asking them? Now, also in other Gospels, you'll see that he will throw in this. So if you had an ox on the Sabbath that fell in the ditch, would you not get your ropes, get your servants, get your manpower, and bring the ox out of the ditch? Because that would involve work. But then here's the other dilemma. You're saving the life. So in other words, if you were that religious, would you think that God, because it's the Sabbath and no work is to be done on the Sabbath, and don't in any way think that you should violate the Sabbath, that God, under any circumstances, do not want anyone to violate the Sabbath? So do you think that God would rather you leave the ox in the ditch? See, that's the quandary of the religious mind. And that's why he asks, so should we save life or do what is evil? Save life or kill? What should we do? And so now you can throw this back to even now. Do you think that God on the Sabbath would want a man healed or for him to suffer in his condition until after the Sabbath? What do you think God would want? Now, the Pharisees would think God would want him to wait till after the Sabbath. He says, verse 5, but after looking around at them with anger and sorrow at the hardness of their hearts. Now notice the reaction of Jesus, right? He's looking at them with anger. He's angry because how hard could you be? How callous could you be that you totally disregard? You would also have to say this, that you would totally disregard God's love, God's value for this human being. So he told the man, stretch out your hands. So he stretched it out and his hand was restored. Now you would think they would rejoice. You would think that they would say, wow, we've seen the power of God. We've seen the love of God. No, verse 6, immediately the Pharisees went out and started plotting with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Another thing that's kind of thrown in here, the Herodians, the Pharisees hated and despised the Herodians. They thought they were trash. They were sinful. Now the Herodians were Herod's people. And Herod was a wicked, evil man. The Pharisees were, they certainly thought they were more pious, even though they were just as hypocritical. But from a religious, see, they were covered with religion, so they certainly thought they were better than the Herodians. But notice this, they were plotting with them. And the one thing, never underestimate sin, how that they got together to plot against Jesus. Now, again, you probably wouldn't see that if you was living there in that day. You wouldn't see that. You just see the clergy, the man with the collar. But notice that they started plotting against the Herodians, with the Herodians. Verse 7, Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a large crowd followed him from Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem, Amia, beyond the Jordan, and around Tyre and Sidon. So he was covering really this crowd that came from all over Israel. The large crowd came to him because they had heard about everything he was doing. And this is the one thing that the Pharisees hated. This is what they hated. he was getting the crowd. Then he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him so the crowd would not crush him. And since he had healed many, all who had diseases were pressing towards him to touch him. And whenever an unclean spirit saw him, those possessed fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God," and he would strongly warn them not to make him known. Now, one of the reasons why he would do this is because people were very superstitious. So instead of recognizing, man, the demons are bowing down to Jesus, they would more likely, oh, Jesus is one of them, Jesus is one of the demons. Verse 13, then he went up to the mountain and summoned those he wanted, and they came to him, and he appointed 12. He also named them apostles to be with him, to send them out to preach, and to have authority to drive out demons. Now, keep this in mind for later on when we will see something. But right here we see a textbook definition of an apostle. I say that because we have a lot of people today that like to kind of heap upon themselves titles. Okay, when I was coming up, it used to be, people were pastors, evangelists, missionaries. That's pretty much what you heard. Then all of a sudden, people now are prophets, and now apostles, now chief apostles, now master prophets. Okay, but here's a textbook definition of an apostle: sent. That's actually what the word means. Sent, a sent one. And obviously, when you put it into context, you are sent. You are an emissary sent out to represent the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And then what you would have here, you could say as a foundation, what we call foundational apostles. They came with the gifts of the Spirit. They were sent out to preach. And when they would preach, in order to validate the message, they came with the gifts of the Spirit. So they went out and they preached, and it was the gifts of the Spirit. That's why he said they had authority to cast out demons, also heal, raise the dead. And thus the apostles were representatives of Jesus. And you see this later on in the book of Acts, that's exactly what they said about Peter and John, that they seen that they have been with Jesus. We could tell those guys have been with Jesus. So then he says, and he appointed 12. To Simon he gave the name Peter, and to James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, he gave the name Boanerges, Boanerges, that is sons of thunder. So the idea of James and John right here were kind of hotheads. And then he says, and then Andrew. Then he says Philip and Bartholomew. Now Bartholomew would be Nathaniel in the Gospel of John, and then Matthew. We read about him last chapter, and then Thomas, who was also doubting Thomas, and then James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and then Simon the Zealot, and then Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Now, what is interesting, Judas is always known as the betrayer. Never, and one that is greedy. But notice, he is always known as whenever you, but in the Gospels, it's always Judas the traitor. He is the traitor. And then so, there's another Judas, and that might be Thaddeus right here. But also Simon, notice this, he's a zealot. Now, zealots, and they were the militant people. But in fact, they were the thorn in Rome's side, because the zealots were the people who always tried to overthrow the Roman government, the Roman government, and they were kind of silly because they were really always bringing knives to gunfights. They were always outnumbered. They would always get beat. but they fought for the cause. That was the zealot right here. And so what we see with the apostles is that Jesus had a very motley crew here. Now, other than really Peter and then James and John, we don't know too much about the other apostles, other than like Thomas. We're going to see later he was doubting Thomas, and then Matthew. Of course, we have his gospel, and then of course Judas betrayed him. But we don't know too much about. And there's a lot of what's called history, tradition about them. Don't know if they're true or not. But after the Gospels, we don't really hear, even in the Book of Acts, we don't even hear about them too much individually. Verse 20 says, "Then he went home, and the crowd gathered, the crowd gathered again, so they were not even able to eat. And when his family heard this, they set out to restrain him, because they said he's out of his mind." Now, this is very interesting, because when you talk about his family, and we're going to see this later, at this point, it is believed that Joseph maybe have already passed away, that he's no longer around. Okay, he's passed away, and the reason why is because he's not mentioned here. But then Mary, and then his we know that that Jesus has at least 4 brothers and 2 sisters. So when it says his family, when his family heard this, they set out to restrain him because they said he is out of his mind. That is you see, the family wasn't too much with Jesus, especially at. Well, let me back up. If you read John chapter 2, when Jesus enters his public ministry, his family is with him. He goes to the temple, he drives out the temple, and then after that point, we don't see his family with him. In John chapter 7, we see that his brothers were rather hostile towards Jesus. And one reason is that Jesus grew up as a very Jewish person. You could say he was an Orthodox Jew. He attended the feasts 3 times a year, and he just, they were very Jewish. And it seems that when Jesus enters his ministry, they're thinking the Messiah, and instead he stirs things up by going against the Jewish leaders. And at this point, it seems that they distance themselves from him. That they and not only do they distance themselves from him, but again, notice at this point, having heard and taught, and again, what's interesting is that they're hearing the miracles, they're seeing the miracles, and their thing is he's out of his mind. That is amazing. He's out of his mind. He's lost it. And then if you were to say logically, family, why do you say Jesus lost it? Critically thinking, why would you say that Jesus lost his mind? Now, this is they set out to no. This is what we call what in modern days we call this a intervention, a family intervention, and it's unbelievable because let's ask the question: why would you think he's lost his mind? I'm going to pick it up. I'll pick this up next time, and I'm going to examine this. Because there's a couple of things too I want to examine with the chapter, but I want to examine that. I want to kind of just pull that apart and say, let's do some critical thinking here. That why would you think Jesus has lost his mind? I mean, if you were if I say, look at all the ministers today, some of the ministers, just a cross section, say, um, this minister has lost his mind, that minister has lost his mind, and maybe not lost his mind, but criticize him. I could put together a pretty good case. What case would the family of Jesus put together to say he's lost his mind? All right, we'll pick it up next time. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.